Come on. Okay, so swarming for me is the most fun part of beekeeping. I love going out and collecting swarms. So one thing that you have to think of as a beekeeper, right? So when I started beekeeping, and most new beekeepers, they worry a lot about killing a bee, you know? Well, you got to remember that, in the spring, you're going to, so a package of bees holds somewhere, 3 to 6,000 bees at least, maybe even higher if you're lucky. And a hive coming out of winter is going to be about 10,000, maybe 15,000 bees. And so, for a hive to lose a bee is like us losing a skin cell. The bee is not the organism is the hive. In order for the organism to survive, it has to reproduce. And the way a bee hive, or the bee itself as an organism reproduces, is by the hive swarming. Okay? So what happens in a swarm? Basically what happens is the bees decide that they are strong enough. And I want to point out that and I think this is, I can say probably without exception, that every hive that survives the winter will swarm or will try to swarm. Okay? And so what happens is the hive decides that it's strong enough that it can reproduce. And it does that by swarming. And what happens is, so they start laying swarm cells. The queen starts laying the eggs at the bottom of the hive to create new queens for the swarm. And just about the time, either just before or just after those queens hatch, the old queen will have slimmed down, and she will leave the hive with approximately half of the bees from the hive. And this picture shows you what a swarm looks like when it's in process. It's amazing when you hear these coming out of a hive. It sounds like almost like a tornado. They come out of the hive, they swirl in, like a tornado, and you have this big, circulating cloud of bees. And there might be, by the time they swarm, it's going to be, like I said, May, June is the time. And you'll probably have in a swarm, you could have anywhere from, 30 to 60,000 bees. So the ball of bees is just huge, absolutely huge. Makes an incredible noise when it comes out of the hive. And it's really cool to watch. What it does is, and I got a little time here so I can explain. It's probably way too much detail for what you guys need to know, but it is my favorite thing to do. So what happens is basically the queen will leave the hive, and she'll typically land somewhere within about 100 feet of the hive. Okay, when the old queen leaves, she goes out, she finds a place to land, and she'll land there. And all the bees that have left with her will form a big cluster around her to keep her safe. And what happens is they send out between like 60 and 80 scout bees. And those scout bees are going to travel in different directions. They're going to travel typically at least a minimum of about 2 miles. They want to get far enough away from the old hive that they don't crossbreed. Those scout bees are going to go out and look for a new place to live. When a scout bee thinks that she's found a new place to live, she comes back and she does a dance on the surface of the swarm that's around the queen, the ball of bees. She's going to try and recruit other scout bees to go with her. They're going to go back to the place that she found. If the other scout bees like it, they all go back to the swarm. They do the same thing until they've recruited about 70 to 80% of the scout bees. When they get enough scout bees that agree it's a new home, they all dance on the surface of the swarm that's around the queen, and it triggers the swarm to take off and follow them to their new home. And so basically, you typically have, from the time the swarm leaves the hive and forms that first little cluster on a tree branch or something near where the original hive was, you're typically going to have 2 to 3 hours before they find a new home and leave. So you got to kind of be Johnny on the spot in order to catch them. But it's a lot of fun. And you think about a package of bees, $150. You catch a swarm, you just made $150. So it's about the easiest way to get more hives as there is. And a lot of folks don't, they don't watch their bees carefully enough or split them in the spring. And so there are a lot of swarms out there. And so you just need to get on the swarm catchers list and go catch them. So, really, why do they swarm? Well, the organism needs to survive, and that's the only way they can do it. If they didn't swarm, they'd overcrowd themselves. They wouldn't be able to, fit all the bees into the room that they potentially they have at their house. So how can you prevent it? Well, you can't. I'm just going to be blunt. You can't prevent a swarm. If the hive overwinters, it's gonna swarm. It's gonna want to swarm unless you do something, okay? And that something is simply split it. So every hive that we have that I overwinter, toward the end of May, I'm gonna split that hive. It depends on how heavy that hive gets, but I'm gonna split it. And splitting a hive, there's a couple ways you can split it. You can either just split it into 2 hives, which is really easy, or you can make nukes, which is a little more difficult. Neither are all that hard to do, but it's basically brain dead simple. I don't think I talk about that in this talk, but this spring, if you guys are interested, anybody who wants to come out, I will show you how to split a hive, and I will show you how to make nukes, because the club makes a bunch of nukes, and then we sell those as well. But it's really pretty simple. So what happens when the swarm when they're getting ready to swarm? Well, the first thing is they got to make some queen cells, right? Because they need a new queen. And that's the ones we talked about. You can see the swarm cells are always down here at the bottom of the frames. And they look like little peanuts. Actually, it's kind of cool because they don't cap them off right away, right? So the egg is in there. The workers draw this out bigger. They feed it royal jelly. You can see the larva in there. It's really pretty cool. And if you see one of those, that the hive is going to swarm. And there's a couple things you can do here. What I like to do is if I find one of these in my hive, or a couple of these in my hive, I know that the hive itself is going to swarm. So before it swarms, I simply take these frames and I put these frames into a new hive. And then I take about half the bees with it, and they're basically going to have a new queen in a very short amount of time. So you keep the old queen, you try to keep the old queen with the old hive without any queen cells, and you move these to a new one, a much smaller one, and let them start their own hive. So obviously the queen lays the egg in here, they feed it royal jelly, it grows, they cap it. During this same amount of time, the original queen is fed less because, let's face it, when she's laying eggs, she's too big and fat to fly. She can walk around the hive just fine, but the old queen has to leave. So the workers start feeding her less, her egg production decreases, her abdomen shrinks down, and she actually loses about 25% of her body weight. So actually she gets in shape for flying. So like I said, so basically what's going to happen, the old queen's going to leave. She's going to take about half the bees with her. The new queen, now, so it says here the queens usually emerge about a week after the swarm. That's typically true. But there are cases where the new queen actually resides concurrently with the old queen. And they seem to be okay with that because they're in swarm mode. So sometimes, queens will emerge prior to the old queen leaving. They don't fight each other at that point. The old queen just prepares to leave and takes off. A lot of times too, you'll have multiple swarm cells hatch very close to the same time. So what happens when multiple queens hatch at the same time? Well, usually what happens is the first queen to emerge is going to go sting and kill all the other queens before they emerge, if they can. The workers will typically allow the newest queen to go in and kill the ones that are still unhatched. Now, sometimes also what happens is that doesn't happen. And so what you get are called after swarms. So the first swarm that the hive produces, right, it'll be, it could be 40 to 60,000 bees. And then, right, so half the bees are gone, but you've still got maybe 40 to 60,000 bees in there. Well, another queen hatches, and the old queen now, which was the one that may have hatched just recently, will then take off with what's called an after swarm, and that one's smaller. The hive now, because the hive was, say, 50,000 bees, the next hive or next swarm that takes off is only 25,000 bees. And that could happen again, and the next one's 10,000 bees, right? And we've seen swarms that have been, the size of a baseball because they just kept after swarming. That's really hard on the hive because it's really hard to build a hive back up in the amount of time that we have here in the Pacific Northwest to get a hive big enough then to survive the winter. So catching a swarm, when is it safe to try? That's really it's really a kind of a personal call. I've done some really stupid things to try and catch a swarm, where I put, a step ladder up in the back of my pickup truck, climbed up to the very top rung where it says "Do not stand on this," and stood on it, and cut a branch off a tree to catch a swarm. Highly, I don't recommend that. That's really stupid. It is, after all, just a swarm of bees. And so really, when you go out, you have to assess the situation. Is it, is the swarm in a place that you can get at easily? And like I said, no swarm of bees is really worth, getting hurt over. So if you're lucky, they're nice and low, like in, this picture here on the right. This one is simple, right? I love seeing hives or swarms like this, because all you have to do is put a box right here underneath, go up here, grab this branch. If the homeowner lets you cut it, it's nice to cut the branch and then drop it right down in the box and give it a shake and knock all the bees off into your box. If they don't want it cut, you can kind of hold the box underneath, especially if you have somebody helping you. Hold the box right underneath and give this a shake. All the bees will fall into the box. When you're doing that, make sure that what you're going to see is you've got the queen, the bees will all follow her into the box. So you got to give it a nice hard shake, because, the queen doesn't want to let go of whatever she's holding on. If, you leave that box sitting on set it there on the ground, if all the bees end up migrating into the box, you have the queen. If they all end up migrating back up to this branch, then she's still up there. Don't be concerned if you see some bees still going up there, because the queen pheromone will be left on that branch. So you'll always have some bees up that want to go back up to that branch. This little picture over here on the left, that we see a lot of swarms that go into pine trees. And, I've seen swarms, 150 feet off the ground, and you look at them and you go, wow, how can I get that swarm? Well, you can't. It's just too high. You just, you watch them leave. That's all you can do. Now it says be prepared. So what do you need to catch a swarm? Well, here's what I recommend. A step ladder, okay? A pair of, simple small brush cutters, trimmers. A pair of loppers, because sometimes you got to cut a little bit bigger branch. A bow saw, and obviously your beekeeping equipment, your jacket and veil, your gloves. And a good box to put them in, a good ventilated box, something so there's good airflow in it. I have what I typically use is an old nuke box that has a screen on the bottom, and you can just drop them directly into that, and that's good for the ride home. I also recommend a ratchet strap to strap the top of the box together so it doesn't pop open and the bees come out. Don't worry about collecting 100% of the bees. You're never going to get them all. It doesn't really matter. Shoot for 90%. If you get 90%, you're good. It's pretty easy. Have your phone on you at all times, because the swarms will typically happen, mid-afternoon to early evening. That's 90% of the swarms happen then, during that warm part of the day. So you're going to get a call, like if you're at work, someone's going to call and say, hey, I have a swarm. Can you come and get it? And when someone calls you, Okay, the first question is, can you send me a picture of it? Okay, because you don't, if they send you a picture and it's, 100 feet up in a pine tree, you can say, look, there's no way we can rescue that swarm. I also get, I bet, I'm going to say probably 70% of the swarm calls I get every year are for paper wasp nests. People call and say, I've got a swarm of honeybees. Can you come and get them? And I say, send me a picture. They send me a picture, and it's a picture of a paper wasp nest. And it's like, guys, that's not honeybees, that's paper wasps. Be prepared, because sometimes people are insistent that they know what honeybees are, and they're honeybees, and they want you to come and remove them. But if you know what a paper wasp nest looks like, it looks nothing at all like a swarm of honeybees. And so I've had people yell at me that I obviously didn't know what I was doing, because they know honeybees, and why wouldn't I come and get them? Anyway, so always ask first about, if you can get a picture of them. And sometimes too, I've had people call about swarms. They've had swarms in the side of buildings, which we have pulled out. And other times people have called for a swarm of bees in the side of a building that there's no way to get them out. You just have to, you tell them, well, the best thing to do is, go get some wasp and hornet spray and kill them if you don't want them there, because there's just no way to pull them out of the side of the building. Anyway, a few things just to be prepared about. Just think about the equipment you're going to need. Make sure you have it handy all the time. Because like I said, you've only got typically 2 to 3 hours, from the time that you get that phone call. And that's the other thing I ask is, when did you see the swarm arrive? Okay. Some people have said, well, geez, I just saw it just came there and I looked up quick and gave you a call. Other people have said, well, geez, I don't know. I could have been there quite a while. And so then you're kind of risking it. Do you want to, make a big run out to somebody's house to try and get this swarm of bees? And I've been in a situation where I've gone out there and the swarm has disappeared already. Okay. Oops, how did that happen? Let's see, where is that? Let's do this one. Yeah. Okay, next slide. Okay, so not only do you have to know what you, what you need to take with you when you are going to catch the swarm, but you also have to be ready for what are you going to do with them once you have them. So you want to make sure that you have a hive body. So that means bottom board, hive body with all the frames and inner cover and a telescoping cover, all ready for them. As well as that should be ready with a feeder in it. Either you can do an inline feeder or an external feeder of one of the several types, but have that all ready and at hand so that when you get the swarm, the captured swarm back, you have some place to put them quickly. You install them just like you would a package, with really one exception. I have found that this is a reason as well that I like to have multiple hives, is if you catch a swarm, if at all possible, I like to grab a frame of brood from another one of my hives and put it in there. Because there have been a number of cases where I've put a frame, or basically a swarm, into an empty box, and they have simply decided they don't like it and they're leaving. And so I've gone to all the work of catching the swarm and putting them into a hive body, and come out the next day and they're all gone. But if you put a frame of brood in there, they will not leave that brood. So I always like to grab a frame of brood and put a frame of brood in there to keep them. So that'll just hold them there. Other than that, you install them just like you would a package. Provide them with food. It says treat for mites, but you've just broken the brood cycle, and there's going to be very, very few mites on a swarm that you've just caught. It's not a bad idea to treat for mites, because you really knock that mite load down dramatically when there's no brood there. And so it's not a bad idea to treat for them, although it's not absolutely necessary. But again, treating for mites is relatively simple, so I would just do it just for prophylactic reasons. And that's it. So, is there any questions about swarming?
Oh, I do not have any current chats from anybody,
Okay.
so
Well,
feel free to.
I have a couple of observations. You can tell swarming is a big treat for beekeepers. We all like it.
Yeah, I mean that's what I said. I mean,
Yeah.
it's my favorite thing about beekeeping. I mean, my least favorite thing about beekeeping is having to harvest honey. I
Oh.
absolutely hate, you know, in the fall, honey production.
Yeah.
It sucks. It's hot. It's terrible. It,
That's
it's
a
in
lot of work.
August. It's the worst time of year. You're in a room that's 100 degrees and everything is sticky. It sucks, especially when you don't like honey. And then my favorite thing is swarming. It's like, I don't know. It's kind of like hunting, I guess. If you like hunting,
Mhm.
right? You go out, you're capturing something. It's just a lot of fun, you know?
Well, a couple of observations I would add is, and this is somewhat tying into the previous class that Kevin gave, but learn to listen to your bees. For instance, with my bees, when they're going to swarm, before swarming, the tone of the hive will change often. And you get a hint that they're going to swarm. The other thing is a good thing to do, because they swarm in the spring. Often, if the hive is crowded and they're confined to the hive for bad weather, they're going to decide to swarm when it gets good weather, sunny and warm and not windy. So, you can kind of get a sense of when you need to start watching them for swarming. The sound and the weather makes a difference for a crowded hive. And the other observation, one quick way of looking for swarm cells, if you have the strength to do it, is to take the brood box and just tip it up and look at the bottom. And often you can see the swarm cells without having to remove or disturb the frames in the hive. And that's a good quick way to look. Otherwise, you're taking frames in and out with the potential of damaging the cells. So those just a few observations I was going to add, and it is a lot of fun. If you're in town, your neighbors will get involved because it is quite the phenomenon. So
There were a couple of questions.
Yeah, are you getting those? Okay.
Yep, I'm seeing them. So so a couple of questions about splitting hives and catching swarms. Yes, the answer is yes to both of them. I will announce when we are splitting a hive. It'll go out to basically everybody through the club. I assume they have your email addresses. I'll tell you what day we're going to split, and everybody's welcome to come out and help split the hive. There was another question about sprinkling sugar water over the frames of a hive prior to basically putting the swarm in there. I've never tried that. I always grab a frame of brood and stick it in there and don't worry about it. So what I do is, you have a 10 frame hive. I pull the 4 frames out of the middle of the hive. I dump my box of bees into the middle of there, shake them all in. I take the 4 frames, set them back in. One of those frames will be brood, and put the cover on and ignore them. And then I've never lost a swarm doing that. They always stick. And let's see. Yeah, and typically, once you've kept bees for a while, you're typically going to drop them into a hive that's already had bees in them. So it's going to have drawn comb, and it's basically going to be a really nice new home for them. It's a little more difficult when you have bare frames with no drawn comb on it. They may not want to stick there as well, and that's when it's probably even more important to put in a frame of brood to hold them there. So, and give them a chance to really force them to start drawing comb in there. There was one other question in there that let me scroll up here a little bit. So one more in there. Splitting. Oh, here it is. They have a neighbor who had a swarm that settled in their eave of their house years ago. Will my bees be drawn to the old site? No. As far as we can tell, you know, that any pheromone that was there will be long gone. Um, and really, when the queen leaves to swarm, she's just going to find some place that's probably mostly convenient for her to land on, and wait while the scout bees go out and find a new home. So I wouldn't worry about that at all. What I would worry about is don't let them swarm. Just split your hive. If you come out of winter and your bees are still alive, monitor them in May and split them. And if they start looking really overcrowded the first part of June, split them again. You got tons of time for the hive to bulk up and get ready for our nectar flow. So like our club hives, our goal in the club hives is not to generate honey, although we do every year. Our goal is to make really good genetics. So if the bees have overwintered, we know that the queen is a strong queen and the genetics are probably pretty good. So I'll split those hives, 2, 3, 4 times. As many as I can split to generate really good, strong hives. Splitting is really simple. And again, when I do that, we'll put out an announcement and I can show you guys a couple ways to split. So one way is really, really simple and the other way is a little more difficult, but instead of splitting, one hive into 2, you can split one hive into 3 or 4. So that's basically making a bunch of nukes out of a bigger hive. So anyway.
So if somebody can't make it to the apiary, do we have a presentation on how to split it on the website?
Yes, we don't.
Okay.
Margo says
No.
no, we don't.
Oh,
But
okay.
what we can do is when I split it this year, we can videotape it and then put it on the
Cool.
website.
Okay.
Because
All right, thank you.
Margo's been doing that. Somebody asked, maybe I missed it, what is a swarm trap? I think what you're talking about is some folks, and I've had this happen actually. We caught a swarm in an empty hive that I had sitting by my other hives. Don't know where it came from. Wasn't mine. Had to be a neighbor's. Really, all a swarm trap is a quote baited hive. There are baits that you can put in, pheromones, things like that. You're just setting out an empty hive, making a potential home for bees, and they'll, with any luck, a bee will find it, and they'll direct the rest of their swarm into it, and you catch a swarm for free. One of our club members has had one of those hives in a tree for years and has never collected anything. And like I said, and mine was an absolute utter disaster. The one that came into mind because I had, what do we have, 5 or 6 hive bodies? I think we had 6. No. It was like, so we had like 4, I think we had 4 hive bodies. I was just storing equipment. I had 4 hive bodies. And then the top hive body only had like 6 frames in it, maybe 5 frames. So a big open gap in the middle. And I started seeing bees coming in and out of this. And I'm like, that's really weird. Okay, there must be a little bit of honey left in there and they're robbing. And then there got to be more and more bees coming out of there. I'm like, that's really strange. What's going on? I open it up and here it had caught a swarm. And that big open cavity that was up in the middle, they filled it full of comb. It was, the whole hive was, all the hive, it was just an absolute utter mess. And, so by the time I caught it and tried to clean it up and get it the way I wanted it, the hive didn't make the winter. So anyway, so if you're going to leave hives, let's sit around, make sure that you have them full of frames, because if you catch something like that, you don't want to have to clean that mess up after they draw comb in areas you don't want them to draw comb in. Okay, anything else? Okay. Like I said, we'll send out notice for package day. Remember, April 17th at our apiary in Medical Lake. We'll send out directions to everybody on how to get there and what time we'll be there. I highly recommend that if you're going to get packages to come and watch how we package the bees. It's good to see. And then everybody on the email list, we will send out and let you know when the other things we're going to do, because typically what we'll do is like 2 weeks after we get the package, we'll open the hive and let everybody look at it. And a couple weeks after that, and then probably 2 weeks after that, we'll probably split a hive. But we'll keep everybody informed. It's usually done on a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday afternoon, depending on when we can make it over there. And then you're obviously all invited, and come and see what's going on. Okay. No other questions? I'll turn it over to Margot.